So, good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. It is with a great pleasure that I welcome you to this new edition of the Sustainability Lunch Talks, this time dedicated to ecosystems and more precisely to the measurement of their integrity. I am Laurent Bétry, and I'm the Sustainability Officer at the University of Luxembourg, and I'm responsible for integrating sustainability into the operations and functioning of the university. And one of the facets of my action is to raise the awareness of the university community on the different themes of sustainability. So this series of discussion has been developed with the help of the University Sustainability Coordination and Expertise Group and is intended to address everyone, committed or not. It aims to set the record straight in the mass of information about sustainability, and this is why we invite recognized researchers in the field to inform us in a short interactive format about the contribution of science to the issues we wish to address. And today we propose to address a topic that is further away from our local considerations, I would say, but extremely important on the global scale and crucial for the future of humanity. So ecosystems are indeed vital because they provide us with a range of services or benefits essential to our existence. This includes, of course, the resources we derive from ecosystems, from wood to water, to the elements we need to make medicines. As we know, forests, oceans, and natural systems also play a major role in climate regulation and carbon dioxide absorption. And ecosystems are, of course, home to plant and animal biodiversity, a complex system in which we are one of many species and which both feeds and protects us. They are also filters to reduce pollution, and finally, and we often do forget that, ecosystems also have a cultural value for many people and a landmark for all of us. As we all know, ecosystems are in danger. They suffer directly from human activities, but also from the consequences of these activities, and it's therefore more and more important than ever to manage them wisely, but also to protect them from degradation in order to preserve the biodiversity they harbor and to ensure the renewal of the resources they produce. So how can we ensure that the ecosystem maintain a level of integrity that is compatible with sustainable use, which means equitable, inclusive, and ecologically sustainable? To discuss this, we have with us Dr. Miguel Equihua Zamora, Senior Researcher at the Department of Environment and Sustainable Development in the Instituto de Ecologia, Inecol in Veracruz, Mexico. Dr. Equihua is the coordinator of the I-Gamma program and research network, of which our university is part of. This network promotes the use and provides socio-ecosystem data to foster human development based on ecosystem services. And this webinar is hosted and moderated by Dr. Philippe Delphos, strategic advisor to the rector, Jens Kreisel. Philippe is an expert in circular agriculture, and his research interests include anaerobic digestion to produce renewable energy and nutrient cycle in food and biomaterial production systems. Right?
Thank you.
So Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. It's a great pleasure to spend this lunchtime together with Miguel, you and Alan, and all the attendees of this talk. Biodiversity is a key topic, I think, in nowadays. Humankind is facing strong challenges. Climate change is a very important one, but maybe related to some inertia in the phenomenon. It takes time to see drastic changes, but they might come. It takes time to recover the climate we had in the past, and it might take decades and generations. But I think biodiversity is a key problem because it's fading away at a speed that we have difficulties to control, and this is happening differently in different parts of the world. Miguel, you are coming from a very diverse region of the world, one of the hotspots for biodiversity, especially located in rainforest and coastal area of Latin America, Africa, and part of Southeast Asia. That's where we find the hotspots. But also biodiversity, while being very restricted in desertic area, they can be hot and dry, like the Sahara. They can be cold and icy if you go to the north or southern poles. There you find more specialization less diversity, but a lot of specialization, and a loss of a species in this environment are usually drastic, because if they disappear, there is no redundancy to cover the loss. So with all this general consideration about biodiversity and the main effect, while biodiversity is at threat, it's mainly land use change. And your area of the world is again quite a challenge in terms of land use change. It's 50% of the responsibility for the loss of biodiversity. And just for the anecdote, we talked about this when we were online together. I used Ecognition, which is a fuzzy logic software to recognize vegetal patterns. I was using this to estimate the area where a soil-borne disease was occurring in Niger. But what I found out also curiously is that this software was capable of recognizing species, making differences between Palanites or Acacia. So, oh, that's something very interesting there. And 20 years later, we talked online, and I thought, my God, Miguel is progressing very well on this topic. So please, the floor is yours, Miguel, and I will be very happy to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much, Laurent. Thank you for having me here. Thank you to the University of Luxembourg and to everybody that made this possible. I'm very happy to be here, suffering a little bit of cold. I come from Mexico, and I left there at a little bit more than 30 degrees Celsius, so it was quite a change on that respect. Certainly, biodiversity and ecosystems are important, and I go directly to what I want to talk. Probably the title that we choose for this conversation was a little bit off, because probably ecosystems are not so weird for numbers, and numbers are important in every aspect of our lives, and so the issue is that it is an important approach to have it combined with numeric approaches. This is just a reminding of what happened in Rio +20. The future we want is the report that came from there. And I go back, this is on automatic, I don't know why. We call for an holistic and integrated approach to sustainable development. We call for humanity to live in harmony with nature. We call for efforts to restore the health and integrity of Earth's ecosystems. Among many things that were talked at that time, we are focused on functioning ecosystems. I think it's very important to realize that we want to have a healthy relationship with ecosystems, and that means that I don't know if, well, I go forward and back according to what happens there. But anyway, the ecosystems produce the benefits, as Laurent was mentioning, that the people enjoy, are systems that are self-support. I mean, I hear many times from young people even that we have to do something for Mother Earth to keep it healthy. But yeah, nature and ecosystems really don't need us. We need more the ecosystems than ecosystems need us. What we have done is to do harm and to depart from the conditions that are supporting us, and that is a sort of call for awareness rather than anything else. Are the foundations, the ecosystems are the foundations of Earth's life support systems for ourselves and for other species. We are probably living on a sixth pulse of massive extinction in geological times, and this is the first time that a single species is responsible for such a thing. So it's a lot on our back to do. This is a slide to show what the United Nations has been doing for a long time. Mexico has been collaborating on these efforts, which are worldwide efforts, on environmental accounting. And this is a new approach on the environmental accounting. It is called the ecosystem accounting approach. And it has the interest on going beyond just having tables on an Excel sheet, for instance, on how much the ecosystems have been reduced in general terms, or how much pollution has been pushed on ecosystems. Now the approach is on mapping the actual spatial pattern of modification of the state of ecosystems. And I think it is a very, very important new generation stage of ecosystem accounting. And Mexico was participating on this with other 4 or 5 countries in the world, and just finished a couple of years ago. And you will see the report at the end of the chat. With this approach, you have this sort of conceptual structure on how the economy is supported by the environment. It is related to ecosystem services, but also to provision of materials for most of the things that we enjoyed, and also for getting away or the disposal of a lot of residuals that we produce and are actually pollution. And one of those pollutants, and several of those pollutants, are responsible for climate change, like CO2, of course, and methane and other greenhouse gases. The system of this accounting system has several levels of details. One of those is the account on ecosystem extent, the amount of the different kinds of ecosystems that a country has as part of the natural patrimony. The other important aspect is in what condition those ecosystems are. And so we have these 2 main accounts of the natural component, extension and condition, and then an effort to understand how that condition and that extent is providing supporting elements to society in terms of all kinds, like fruit, like fiber, wood, you name it. And of course, this is fairly wide open. And in the case of Mexico, we did 3 ecosystem services analysis, one for tourism, another one from the production of agriculture, and another one on carbon. So we have, it was a hard analysis. It is a sort of first cut to what can be done, but there are results on that. And then to translate that provisioning of services into value in terms of price, money that has a figure to try to understand what nature is doing for us. Sometimes I am tell off that it is stupid to put the price on nature, and probably people that is angry about that is right. Nature is worth for many things, and probably we shouldn't think of it in terms of price, but it's a way, in terms of language, it's probably a way of communicating, and so it is important to understand, to internalize how the things that we are taking away from nature is translated in benefits for society. If you think in terms of health, there is a lot of things that we are using from nature, and even the air we breathe, water we drink. food we eat. Okay, away from ecosystems and accounting, I am moving now into the arena of artificial intelligence because it's the approach that we use to try to build on the figures that we need for accounting in the case of Mexico. And we found several paradigms that can be used for modeling what we have in front. And we would like to stress that although there are many very capable approaches from artificial intelligence, we as humans are very much happy with, of course, accuracy, but also with explainability and interpretability. We have found, and the community on artificial intelligence has found, that computers could be very good at identifying patterns, but often those devices are very opaque to human understanding, particularly what is, for instance, neural networks, surprisingly because of the name, but those neural networks has nothing to do with our neural human nature, and it's even harder to communicate what they are made of. And so we have this problem of developing those models that become black boxes. And as Cynthia Rodin from Duke University is saying, we should stop explaining black boxes, which are by machine learning models, and especially if what is at stake is of high value, like sustainability. And that's one of the reasons we use Bayesian networks for this. In terms of this accuracy, explainability, and interpretability, there are values, I could say, human values on this modeling, no? The transparency, interpretability, and explainability, as I am trying to explain on this slide. In general, models, and in my tradition of a modeler in ecology, we use models as a way of communicating with other humans. Now, in the times of high-power computers, we are moving a little bit on the power of the computer to communicate with among themselves, the computers, leaving humans behind. And I am worried on that. I want to keep on accuracy, of course, but explainability, interpretability, for humans. This is a very old approach to the environmental agenda. Is what it was called the model of pressure state response. It was used for the devising of indicators and many times for approaching in general the development of national programs everywhere, even United Nations use, and you can find a lot of references to this approach. It's an approach based on a causal understanding. I mean, if you do this, that will happen, and the state of the system will go that way. So, as you can imagine, it's a sort of explainable model, and I just wanted to mention it here. Okay, now coming back to ecosystems, I want to talk a little bit of our experience in Mexico. Mexico is, as Philip was saying, is one of the mega diverse countries in the world. It's top in terms of plant species, animals. It has a very complex topography from above 5,000 meters high to sea level, with a lot of mountains, making a lot of a very heterogeneous landscape that is host for a wide amount of different kinds of organisms, and also of cultures, because biodiversity, as one could expect, even it's happening to us, and probably we are not very much aware of it. Biodiversity affects our culture. The way we perceive our surrounding environment has a lot to do on how do we feel, how the time of the decisions that we take, the celebrations that we enjoy. There is a lot of things that has to do on this natural relationship between biodiversity and humankind. Okay, coming back to artificial intelligence, I would like to mention that in terms of explainability, I am very impressed by the proposal by Judea Pearl, and now from other authors. He has some other books earlier than this one, but I am recommending to the audience this book, the book of Why. And it has to do with this new science of cause and effect. It is very interesting because, as Judea Pearl, it could be the start of a revolution, of an approach on understanding and providing a way of modeling causal relationships in a very successful way. Okay, Judea Pearl is also one of the first people that starts to use this modeling approach that we call Bayesian networks. Bayesian networks are made of two big things. One is a diagram where you, with nodes or figures, you paint in a blackboard, for instance, the relationships of influence or cause with the help of an arrow between one variable and another. If you have, for instance, biodiversity and humans, and you put an arrow from humans to biodiversity, suggesting that humans are having a causal effect on the decline of biodiversity, that would be the qualitative component of a Bayesian network. Then, within the same structure, you can specify a probabilistic description of what is going on under within the engine of calculations. It's a little bit more complex, but they are very useful. This is a sort of very simple Bayesian networks. Bayesian networks have also the characteristic of being, it is possible to separate a very complex model with a lot of nodes and arcs, could be separated in particular components and be analyzed very successfully. And one thing that Judea Pearl found is that there are three rules of causal flow of correlation. And those are called the D-separation rules. I am not going to go into this, but it is important for people to know where this is moving on to is described in the book of Why. With that sort of approach and background, we produce something like this. This is a machine learning social ecological appraisal. So we have the description of ecosystemic attributes. It's a very generalized representation of what we actually did. We say that these ecosystemic attributes are a condition on the ecological context where the ecosystem is developed. The attributes also are dependent on what condition the ecosystem is because of human pressures. And I think that is an intuition that everybody could have. And depending on the ecosystem attributes, human could do the removal, as I call it in this diagram, which it would be taking out, for instance, wood from a forest. We also do pollution. We drop polluted water in our rivers, or we let smoke go to the atmospheres. But we also receive some other benefits. What I put here as support, like the cleaning of air or the regulation of carbon, etc. I could go even a little bit more complex and to say that if you could imagine what is happening today, that would affect what is happening tomorrow. That's a Bayesian network in dynamic terms. It's just for the record, I'm not going to go into details of this. Okay, now, how do we go from the modeling to the actual use of this to see or to make the model useful? And for that we need data. And in the case of Mexico, we use satellite imagery. Here's the Landsat platform, or Sentinel platform from Europe. We can use that. We could use field data. We put cameras like you are seeing here that are automatically shot, and you can have an idea of what is happening in the ecosystems. You can hear ecosystems if we listen a little bit. This is an automatic recording of an ecosystem. So we are inviting with the approach, it is part of what we were proposing in Mexico. We operated this as the monitoring system of biodiversity in Mexico, deploying automatic systems to record biological information. What you just heard is not the jaguar that you see in the figure, but a crawling monkey, which are very noisy. Also some birds, and you can tell that it probably is early in the morning. So there is a lot of ecology on different ways of perceiving the information. With that kind of information, we go into a spatial representation. What we call here a pixel is we have a representation of the world, or Mexico in this case, for squares of 200 meters in our case. And we are okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And each square is a pixel, and for that pixel we could have a lot of information, the satellite information, the pictures that we were taking, the sound that we were taking, and we have a sort of that database which is pixel oriented, so we would have a spatial representation, but at the same time many dimensions, including the economic dimensions. Okay. This is the actual network that we use, the Bayesian network that we use to model ecosystem integrity. In the case of Mexico, it is what is called here MROBI. It's a little bit difficult to understand probably, but is the state of the ecosystem. Is our actual ecosystem integrity index, and that is related to a lot of variables. It's very complex, but just to have an idea of what is happening. From that model, we came back to pixels, and we are depicting here the actual ecosystem integrity index as a map of Mexico. And the more the red is the harder the destruction of ecosystems, is lower integrity. The greener the higher the ecosystem integrity. And so you can see that the areas like central Mexico, and if you go closer, you could see even Mexico City, really red. And if you go to the mountains, you can see green. If you go to the desert, like on the Baja California Peninsula, on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see deserts with very little trees, but in fairly good condition as a desert, as an arid land. So we have the impression that our model is actually capturing fairly well at least our sort of intuition of what is the condition of ecosystems. If you take two pictures in time of ecosystem condition, you could do a map like here of how it is changing. And so you can see that some places are going worse, some places are going better. And so you can actually use this accounting system on an ecosystem approach to monitor how the national policies on environment are performing. And so I think that this is promise on systems like this. For a country like Mexico, the origin of corn, I like it. I wanted to put a little bit of biodiversity from arid lands. So you have some cacti here, some endemics, yeah. Corn, center of origin of corn, and some animals watching at us. Biodiversity is also curious about what we are doing in this experiment of life. What an intelligent animal could do. Well, this is the report that is on the web. This is you can go there and you can read it. It's for free. We have the version in the system of environmental accounting, the general proposal by United Nations, the report for the case of Mexico, and the Spanish version made by the National Instituto on Statistics and Geography. And this is all I have. Thank you to a lot of people that have been participating on IGAMA, on helping us to develop approaches to have to work for sustainability, and institutions. Thank you very much to the University of Luxembourg that is part of this effort. With this, I'm finished and open for questions. I hope it didn't take too much time. I hope I could make myself understand.
There's already a lot of reaction in the audience, a lot of hand clapping.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Appreciating your talk, Miguel. And I see Julia Josieluar, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing very correctly, has raised a hand. Do we accept question by orally, or we do it in the chat?
We can try. I'm not sure that we can.
Julia, if you hear us, maybe you can try to ask directly your comment, your question, or make a comment.
I try to unmute, but.
Okay, the person prefers to wait a little bit. Maybe I can start with some questions. I find out that you are highly interdisciplinary, Miguel.
Oh yeah, certainly.
And the university is really keen to develop interdisciplinarity. We do this thanks to an instrument that we built in the Institute for Advanced Studies. And I wanted to ask you, how do you evolve in your career towards interdisciplinarity? Was it something that you had always in your heart and it became natural? Or gradually you build a network of colleagues that compensate your approach with different disciplines?
Yes, I think I learned the hard way. I was like a hard, I am still a hard biologist and ecologist, in love with numbers. I did quite a lot of mathematics in my life, and but also very much convinced of the sustainability agenda. And I found it surprising how hard it is to communicate to different sectors. And the challenge of sustainability is against that. I mean, if we really want humanity to go for a new pathway on a sustainability utopia, I say at this point, we have to change so many things, from the technological base on how we produce energy, for instance, our addiction to fossil fuels, the way we are also addicted to financial speculation. So there is cultural things, there is well, I am from a family of economists, and probably that helps as well. I understand a little bit of how that goes on the minds of economists. But there are many dimensions on the issue. And as I was trying to suggest, what is this thing of humans, Homo sapiens, as an intelligent animal? What does it mean? It's an experiment of Earth evolution to produce such an example of life, but what for? And of course, evolution has no end or meaning. The meaning is for us, and we don't understand ourselves. So I think that we have to rethink so many things, that we have to be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and nobody has to be left behind.
And we have to cross disciplines and borders.
We have to cross. Yeah, and rethink of so many things. Well,
there's a question from Suzanne Siebentritt, a specialist in photovoltaics or in energy. She's asking, what is the time frame of the data that you presented, and did it cause any political consequences in your country? And do you extend your research worldwide, or do you still focus on?
Well, this is an effort that is going worldwide. Every country is going their own way. I am now participating on the forest assessment of condition for the same program of the United Nations on environmental accounting. We have found that it is very difficult to press experts to solve you saw the model that we are proposing. It's very complex. And the solution that most countries are adopting is to search for experts, national experts on biodiversity, and ask them which are the indicators? Where is the data on the organisms, and what are the numbers that are related to different levels of condition? And we understand that is very difficult to come along. So I think it is a very natural way of going for modeling, because the complex interrelationships among the data sets. So I hope that could help. But in terms of what is happening in Mexico, for many years, the Forestry Commission was gathering field data, for almost 20 years. And so what they were producing is a data set that was assembled in a cycle of 5 years. So we have this amount of data. Of course, if you go for satellite data, that could be probably shorter. But our time frame is on that. And so we have produced from 2004 to 2018.
And thanks to this time frame, are you able to differentiate between human influence
Oh, yeah.
or maybe indirect human influence, or maybe natural?
Yeah, it's hard to tell, but yes, I think that most of what we can catch on this two pictures of ecosystem integrity, the change that we identify is mostly human related. One could be because of the development policies that are deployed in places, or because of conservation policies that are also implemented. Yes, so you have greener areas and redder areas. The model that we are using is 250 meters on the side, the pixel. So it's fairly fine grained for the level of analysis at national level, but it's also far away from a scale to relate to particular project interventions. But we are working on that as well. So we hope to innovate on environmental impact assessment with this kind of approaches. As you can see, if you have this accounting system and you have a layer of national assessment of ecosystem condition, you could relate particular projects to, as a baseline, the national ecosystem condition, the commitments of the project to not damage beyond necessary modifications, the ecosystem conditions, and then to monitor what is happening. So it could be possible.
Do you see any ways to improve your model approach? You have the Bayesian model, I talked about Ecognition, which is a fuzzy logic software that you can actually taught how to recognize some pattern or to attribute some pattern to a specific
Oh yeah,
species.
certainly. In fact, it is interesting what you mentioned on fuzzy zeta. What I was doing my PhD at the University of York, my master's thesis was on fuzzy clustering of ecological data, actually. It was one of my first papers. Very successful. It was very nice. It is a change of paradigm of how do you describe the environment, but it was very successful. In the case of what we are doing now here, we have the challenge of producing huge amounts of pictures. Many pictures are empty, and some have animals because they are on an automatic shot because of sensor on movement. So if a branch moves because of the wind, it shots, but there is nothing interesting. Probably there is something interesting if we change our mind frame. It is looking at how the forest is looking at the moment, but we want to see animals and to recognize what kind of animal. And for that, we are actually using more opaque techniques of artificial intelligence, like neural networks. And the same for sounds. We have recorded on ultrasonic and natural sound. And ultrasonic is very good for bats. And we have been very successful in recognizing species.
And DNA, do you track or monitor DNA?
It has been a wait from us because of a price, but we are interested on the subject. The other dimension that could be interesting is to have electronic noses, smelling ecosystems. So that's the kind of thing.
There's a specific question regarding benchmark to use to define the color of a pixel. Is a dark green pixel perfect? Or I guess the person is asking, it's Fadi. Maybe Fadi, if you want to specifically ask your question, it would be easier for Miguel to answer.
Well, the colors are just a representation of the number. And we have a range from 0, which is no ecosystem at all, probably in city center Mexico, where you have just concrete, and 100%, probably on top of a mountain where you have a very well-developed forest. All the values in the middle are ranges of mixtures of red and green.
Can we talk a little bit about agrobiodiversity?
Oh yes, of course.
I think it's quite an interesting topic for both of us. I discovered this while I was working for the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, the CDGR, which is linked to the United Nations, funded by many nations in the world, currently suffering lack of funding, but these centers were the main gene banks of diversity of crops on which we rely today for feeding the planet. Mm-hmm. CIMIT in Mexico is holding the gene bank for maize and wheat. Mm-hmm. You have pulses and other legumes in Latin America. I forgot the center. In Colombia, I think it might have been closed. I mean, you have different crops that are well preserved in gene banks across the world thanks to these centers. Europe understood that there was a need to maintain this diversity and built a gene bank in Norway under the permafrost. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the permafrost is melting and it was flooded. So it's really the crops that we rely for the future I tread, and we lost this diversity. Today you have varieties that have been selected for a specific fertilizer with a specific hormone to reduce the growth, with a specific resistance to some pest or sensitivity to other pests. But I think with the Green Deal in Europe, we will be left without pesticides. We will be left probably with less source of fertilizer, because Europe is highly dependent on fertilizer. So we might need to have to go back to this agrobiodiversity to pursue an adequate feeding of a growing population. So what is your views on this?
Very interesting question. I wrote a chapter in a book many years ago with my professor, Dr. Jerzy Rendowski, top biologist and botanist in Mexico, on Mexican biodiversity. And one of the chapters was the plants of man. At the time, we were not concerned on gender and all of that kind of thing. So probably plants of humanity now. It's amazing how little we care about agrobiodiversity nowadays. It was something that the Neolithic people gave us, and we have done very little from that time. They were primitive. And we have been doing very little from that time to now. We are eroding most of the biodiversity, and yes, I think that we probably is part of this awareness. I see, for instance, my son was, he's a mathematician, but he suddenly started to be interested in tomatoes. Not because of course he wants to eat them, but also he started to cultivate them at home. And I think that this is something that could be very interesting on millennial people, to go back into nature in that way. I understand, for instance, that on the times of domestication of potato in Chile, Bolivia, it was a tradition for a new family, when they were getting married, they were giving among the gifts that they were given, there was the plants that they were going to use to support themselves. And how well that crop performed was how well the family performed. The linkage for me between nature and human values are so emblematically close on such an expression that I would like to see that nowadays, isn't it? So I think that we should go back to that. I was also writing a paper for the people on biotechnology, on the importance of biodiversity for biotechnology. And I was, while I was researching on this, I was a little bit or a lot surprised that biodiversity is not helping, not even today, to go away from this loss of biodiversity. They are not doing a lot to change that. They are also looking at probably the same sort of cultivars that we have, probably doing some changes, improving and making some experiments on what that will mean for ecosystems, but not producing a lot of new biodiversity. And the other thing that I learned is that in order for things to work in this era, we have to be connected. The history of life in the planet is a thread. Is coming from the origin of life, from the kind of molecules that started life in this planet, the kind of DNA, the kind of proteins, sugars. And life understands that chemical signal all along the history. We are connected with our past. And if you go too far away from that because of our technological capabilities, we probably are producing things that are not going to communicate with the life that we have. Probably some people want to have a different discourse. But I don't think it's going to be productive. In order to be successful, it has to be connected, I think.
More specific question from Jenny Grisner. She's asking how the model can differentiate by new species appearing and species disappearing in one specific habitat. And can this lead to misinterpretation that actually you might still have erosion of biodiversity, but there is redundancy and a replacement of one species by another?
Well, we are using a lot of remote sensing information, and it is hard for those platform data to differentiate that. So we have this problem. Sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between a forest and a plantation. It is even harder to differentiate some natural grassland from modified grassland for cattle ranching, or even from some crops. That's why we are interested in having some field data. I think that although remote sensing has grown a lot and it's very successful for many things, for our purposes on monitoring biodiversity, we will have to go to the field somehow. What we are suggesting is that probably deploying ground sensors that could help us to do it massively, because having a lot of trained people to go on and do that thing is probably not possible. And also on the changes on the interest on the preparation of professionals. We have diminishing people power to do it. So probably we have to go on machines. And so that's why we are experimenting with these photo traps or recordings and things like that. But certainly field data is going to be important for that, and is the way to address something like the question is asking.
Then you have a last question maybe from Raquel Reckinger. It's more regarding collaboration between your team, what is going on in Mexico, and how the governments could benefit from your experience and how we could establish stronger links with your team or with other teams in the world that have similar approaches.
Yes, well, we are open up to exchange of experiences and to work together. We are very much on a sort of approach as I am asking now at the Institute of Ecology to develop a policy of open science. Of course, we are on open data. We have been discussing on Luxembourg sometimes on the open data agenda here. We know that it is hard, but it's one of the other cultural changes that has to go. And I didn't answer how this is impacting on policy in Mexico, but we did the pilot was hosted in Mexico by the official Statistical and Geography institution. It's part of the federal government, and the report went through them, and so it is connected. That institution has been also trying to engage the National Bank, the General Accounting Minister in Mexico. I mean, to go beyond the space of biodiversity and environmental sector to the wider development agenda. In fact, when this new version of the environmental accounting was presented at the United Nations, the General Secretary said that it was an effort that could put an end to the mistake of calling development what is destroying the world. So, again, coming back to the sustainability utopia, I hope so.
Those are two antagonistic words, sustainability and development.
Well,
that's a nice strategy. There's one last question. I think it's a very important one. It's from Fadi Fikani. The work you conducted is mostly on land. Is there any team in the world working on similar approach for water, ocean, rivers?
Yes, certainly. United Nations is now moving to the oceans. Even in Mexico, to document what is happening on continental waters is hard. It's harder to get quality data for water, somehow. Of course, you have information on many parameters on pollution, the quality of water, the presence of dangerous germs, things like that. But biodiversity in water bodies is not that easy. There are many things that are also well documented, especially for oceans, and the goal now is to develop something similar to this for oceans, and it's coming, but it's not yet here.
Well, thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you very much, Philippe, for this very informative and lively webinar. Especially that we were together in the same room, so it was very nice. So, nice webinar, the use of artificial intelligence to provide numbers and data to check ecosystem integrity. So with the webinar, we finally extended our coverage of sustainability topics to ecosystems, so I'm glad for it. So I hope that you enjoyed the presentation and Q&A session. The recording of the talk will be made available on the sustainability pages of the university website in a few days. So it's now time to end the talk, but I would like to already invite you for the next Sustainability Lunch Talk that is scheduled on Wednesday, the 26th of April, after Easter break. Professor Conchita D'Ambrosio and Professor Philippe Van Kerm, both from the Faculty of Humanities, Education and Social Sciences of the university, will talk about SDG number 1, no poverty. So please visit also our intranet pages to see the program of the next talks and also the dates. Read the newsletters that my student assistant Moses and I have prepared on sustainability at the university. So you are much welcome to subscribe to these very short newsletter, and I wish you all a very good afternoon, and I'm closing the talk by thanking again Professor Equihua Zamora for his visit and excellent talk, and Philippe also for your excellent questions and contributions. So thank you very much, and
Thank you, Miguel.
hopefully
Thank you for having me.
we'll see each other next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.